a sniper's fight for survival, and has put up a different version of the story. Please head out to his channel. The link is in the description box. So, head over there and help with a like and a subscribe. Now let's start with today's story. I was down in the basement, buried in the pile of paperwork on my desk, when I heard the familiar laughter drifting through the walls from upstairs. My wife, Jessica, and her sisters were at it again, giggling about this, joking about that. It was a routine of sorts. They came over a few times a month, and I didn't mind. I wasn't the type to hover over every little thing. But today felt different, like I wasn't supposed to be here, eavesdropping. I'd left my car at the shop for new tires and a brake job, so I'd walked home, taking my time, enjoying the crisp air. It was quiet outside, but the buzz of their conversation was impossible to ignore. From the top of the stairs, I caught snippets of their voices, each one laced with the same carefree energy that I used to love about them. It was clear they hadn't noticed I was home yet, and for a moment, I stood still, listening. "I'm telling you, girls, Dave still doesn't know a thing," Beth laughed, her voice high-pitched with amusement. "He thinks the twins are his, but they're not," Jessica interrupted, cutting her sister off with a giggle. "No way. I've told you, those kids are definitely not his." "What?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Of course not," Jessica went on. "He believes they are because he's too busy working all the time. But you know, the funny thing is, he never asks why they don't look like him. Not a single question, not even when they don't have his eyes." Beth's voice was playful, but there was something else, something darker in it now. I could hear it, the hidden strain of something they were all keeping from me. "Nope, he doesn't care. And you want to know why?" Jessica said, her tone suddenly more serious. "Because he's too wrapped up in his own world. That's why. It's easier to pretend everything's fine." I clenched my fists. What the hell were they talking about? I knew Dave, Beth's husband, but now, the words didn't make sense, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. "And Brad?" Another sister, Sarah, piped in. "He's got no clue either, right?" "None," Jessica said with a chuckle. "It's all in the details, you know? They never ask the right questions. Like, why does little Maddie look exactly like your ex-husband? But Brad still thinks she's his." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Their laughter seemed so wrong now, like it had been hiding something beneath it all along. The weight of their words sunk in as my mind raced. None of them had children with their wives? What the hell? My stomach dropped, and everything around me felt distant, as if the walls of the house were closing in. I wanted to march up the stairs, throw open the door, and demand an explanation, but I couldn't. My legs felt like lead. Instead, I remained frozen in place, listening in on the conversation I never meant to hear. What was I hearing? I thought about everything that had seemed so perfect, so normal. But now, the cracks in my world were impossible to ignore. "They really are so clueless, aren't they?" Beth snorted, her voice dripping with something like disdain. "And honestly, I'm not sure how long I can keep up this charade with Brad." I felt a coldness wash over me. A betrayal? A lie? A joke at someone else's expense? It all felt like one big game to them, and I was nothing but a pawn. "So, what's the plan?" Sarah asked, her voice softer now, almost sympathetic. "You've got to tell him sometime, Jess." "No," Jessica replied quickly, her voice sharp. "Not yet. I can't. Not yet." I could hear them all falling into a comfortable silence, their laughter fading into something darker. As I stood there in the basement, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the last to know the truth. It was in that moment, listening to my wife and her sisters, that I realized the truth I had never suspected. None of them had children with their husbands. At first, I felt sorry for the men. How could they not see what was happening? They were being made fools of by their own wives and brothers-in-law. It was cruel, and it made my stomach churn to think about it. But as I stood there, my mind racing, it all started to click. The truth was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just that the men were clueless. No, the real kicker was that these women, my wife included, had been playing a game all along. They were all screwing the other men in the family, my brothers-in-law, and what was worse, they were making sure none of them were the fathers of their own children. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a scheme, something much darker, something I never would have guessed was happening under my own nose. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. My sister-in-law's children weren't even fathered by her husband. No, the fathers were her brothers-in-law. My wife had kept this secret from me, from all of us. They had taken pleasure in the deception, the lies, the control. I could almost hear the laughter in my mind, those high-pitched giggles of betrayal that echoed down the hallways of my house, turning the air heavy with their shared secret. I couldn't even look at Jessica the same way anymore. She had laughed with her sisters about how they had fooled everyone, and I had been the fool. They were all in on it, playing with the lives of their husbands and children as if it was a joke, a game. But it wasn't just them. No, the worst part was that my father-in-law had been in on it too. Or rather, he had been the one who was the fool. Because, in reality, he didn't even have daughters of his own. It was all a farce, a twisted, disgusting farce that had played out right under his nose. They had manipulated everyone, including him, making sure none of their husbands ever realized they weren't the fathers of their kids. The more I pieced together, the more disgusted I became. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? I was trapped in their web, a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. And then, there was Jessica, my wife. I stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, unable to move, unable to breathe. Her words echoed in my head. "You're just a fool," she had said. "You don't deserve to know, and you'll never have your own children." Her voice had been so cold, so dismissive. It was like everything I had believed about our marriage was nothing but a lie. It hit me then, the truth I had been refusing to face. She and her sisters weren't just having affairs with their brothers-in-law. No, they were sleeping with other men too, other men outside of the family. The thought made me feel sick. I had been nothing but a joke to them, a mark in their twisted game. And the worst part of it all? The one thing that stuck in my mind as I stood there in that basement, feeling like the walls were closing in on me, was this. I had married her. I had fallen for her lies, her manipulation. How could I have been so blind? How could I have ever trusted someone like her? The anger surged in me, but it was laced with an overwhelming sense of betrayal, of loss. All those years, all that time I had spent thinking we had a real, honest connection. It was all a facade. I had married the woman I thought I loved, but I had been so wrong. So wrong. I couldn't shake the realization that I had been living in a house of lies, surrounded by deception. The entire structure of my marriage, my family, was built on secrets. So, I did what I could to take control of the situation, something I should have done a long time ago. I started gathering DNA samples. I had to know. I couldn't just sit there anymore, pretending that everything was fine, pretending that I was part of something honest. The more I thought about it, the more I understood how far this had gone. None of the women knew for sure who the father of each child was. They just knew they hadn't slept with their husbands when they were fertile. They had all done the same thing, made sure to sleep with someone else during those times, but they never really cared about who the actual father was. The thought made my blood run cold, and I couldn't even look at my own children the same way. It wasn't like I could turn back time, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to stay in a relationship that was built on this kind of betrayal. So, I quit sleeping with Jessica. No arguments. No complaints. No health issues. I didn't need an excuse. I simply moved into another bedroom that day, bought a new bed, and that was that. I didn't make a big deal of it. I didn't scream or rant. I didn't tell her how deeply hurt I was. I just stopped. When she came to me later, asking why I wouldn't sleep with her, I didn't sugarcoat it. "I just don't want to," I said, simple as that. No elaborate story, no pretentious excuse. I didn't owe her an explanation, not after everything that had come to light. She didn't press me. She didn't seem to care. It was almost like she was relieved, like she had more important things to do anyway, things that didn't involve me. She complained to her sisters about me moving out of the bedroom, but not once did she mention the lack of sex. Of course, that didn't bother her. She was getting all the sex she needed from other members of the family, and God knows how many other guys she was sleeping with. It wasn't a loss for her. Hell, I wasn't really wasting much of my time on her either. When you realize how deep someone's betrayal runs, the emotional connection just evaporates. What was the point in trying to be intimate with someone who had no real interest in you, in your feelings, in your family? We still did the same things, went through the motions, family dinners, outings, the usual routine. But the feelings, the connection, were gone. It wasn't the same anymore. I wasn't their father, not in the way I once believed. I was just going through the motions, pretending for the sake of appearances, but inside, everything had shifted. I could be loving to the children, sure, but it wasn't the same kind of love anymore. It wasn't the love I thought I had when I first signed up for this life. And Jessica? She didn't even seem to notice the loss of intimacy. She'd made her choices long ago, and now it was my turn to make mine. The real loss wasn't the lack of sex. It was the loss of trust, of honesty, of everything I thought we had. But in her world, it was no big loss for either of us. And that was the most heartbreaking part of all. By this point, I had decided to take the situation into my own hands. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for things to unravel on their own. No, I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let anyone stand in the way of getting them. I started by wiring the house for sound. I didn't need video. The DNA had already confirmed enough of what I suspected, and I wasn't going to let myself be in the dark anymore. I knew it wasn't just the physical evidence that mattered. It was the truth, and I was going to have all of it. I'd already tested the kids. It started innocently enough, a simple DNA test for one of those online databases. Just something to satisfy my curiosity, or maybe I thought it would give me some clarity. I got the results, and that's when the pieces began to fall into place. When I started checking around, it didn't take long before I realized the truth. None of these kids were really mine. They weren't even my wife's children in the way I had assumed. Once I saw that, I moved quickly, getting DNA from the other children, my alleged nieces and nephews. The truth came out faster than I expected. A few of them were half-siblings to the kids I had thought were my own. The connection was undeniable. They all had the same grandmother, and the patterns made it easy to put together. I could see how my wife and her sisters had carefully orchestrated everything, making sure the children were fathered by other men. The real work came with my wife and her sisters. I needed their profiles too, and that's when I got crafty. It wasn't difficult. Hairbrushes, spoons, glasses, anything they left behind. I knew they weren't careful, and the thought of getting their DNA sent a chill down my spine. But I didn't care anymore. I wanted the truth, and I was going to get it. So, I started collecting. I got hair from their brushes, used cups, and spoons that hadn't been washed properly. It wasn't hard at all to get their profiles. Soon, I had a complete picture of the whole family. My wife, her sisters, their kids, their husbands, and even the cousins that were always hanging around. Every single person who had a role in this messed up little world of lies. Every time a new relative showed up, I didn't hesitate. I'd slip a hairbrush or a piece of something they had touched into a bag, and in no time, I had another DNA profile. I wasn't going to let anyone slip through the cracks. At some point, I realized that even the older generation wasn't off limits. If I was going to get the full truth, I had to cover every base. So, I didn't stop there. I got the DNA from Grandma and Grandpa too. They had played a part in all this, even if they hadn't known it at the time. They were part of the family, and the family had been keeping secrets for generations. It was a slow burn, but the picture was becoming clearer and clearer. And every new piece of evidence made the whole thing feel even more surreal. I had no idea what I was going to do with all this information yet. But one thing was for sure. I wasn't going to be the last person to know the truth. Not anymore. At one point, I actually considered diving into the idea of writing a research paper, something to explore the probability of being characterless as a hereditary trait. It was a thought that almost amused me, if not for the deeply disturbing reality that lay behind it. I mean, think about it. If the lies, the deceit, the blatant disregard for honesty and commitment were somehow embedded in their genes, then maybe there was some twisted sense of inevitability about it all. Maybe it wasn't just my wife and her sisters who had passed these tendencies down to their children. Maybe they had inherited it, like a sickness that had seeped through the family, infecting every generation, every child born into this mess. Was it nature? Was it nurture? Or was it just a matter of living in a family that had normalized these things? Maybe there was some sort of psychological inheritance going on, where children learned from their parents' actions, and those actions became part of their DNA in a way that wasn't just biological, but behavioral too. It almost seemed plausible. Maybe it was too simple, but the more I saw of their behavior, the more it felt like there was something inherited, something ingrained in the way they operated. But then, I would snap back to reality. I wasn't here to write a paper. I wasn't here to analyze or rationalize their behavior in some academic way. This wasn't some theoretical exercise. This was real life, my life. And all the patterns, all the lies, all the deception, none of it was going to bring me peace, no matter how much I tried to understand it from a distance. Then day had finally arrived, the day I had been waiting for. I'd spent months preparing for this moment, arranging everything carefully with my lawyer, ensuring I had all the evidence, all the details, locked away. The time for secrets was over. It was the 50th wedding anniversary of my in-laws. It was arranged at a big hotel. People giving speeches about how wonderful their marriage had been, how inspiring their love story was. It was almost laughable now, knowing what I knew. They spoke about their great example, about how their marriage was a beacon of success. Everyone chimed in, every brother-in-law, every cousin, every friend, all parroting the same lines about love, commitment, and the importance of family. They all painted a picture of perfect harmony, of two people who had made it through the years, strong and united. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew how deeply this family was fractured, how the very foundation they prided themselves on was a lie. I stood there, in the back of the room, listening to the speeches. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the center of the room. The microphone was waiting, and I could feel the eyes of at least 150 people, family, distant relatives, friends, and some business partners, turning toward me. I could see the pride on my father-in-law's face, the gleam in my mother-in-law's eyes. Everyone was so proud of their legacy. But none of them knew that their perfect family was a mirage. I began speaking slowly, choosing my words carefully, letting the silence hang in the air before I spoke. 50 years, I started, the microphone amplifying my voice. It's a long time. A lot of things can happen in 50 years. I've known my in-laws for over a decade now, and in those years, I've learned a lot about love, about loyalty, about family. I continued, my voice steady but firm. But I've also learned that sometimes, what we think is real isn't. The room went silent. I could hear a few whispers in the background, but I kept my gaze focused on the faces in front of me. It's funny, I went on, how we can live our lives, trusting the people closest to us, thinking they have our best interests at heart. But sometimes, trust is a fragile thing. And sometimes, when you peel back the layers, you realize it was all a facade. You see, while everyone here is celebrating 50 years of marriage, some of us have been living in a much different reality. A reality where loyalty was nothing but a word, where the very people we trusted the most betrayed us in ways that you couldn't even imagine. My wife and her sisters watched me, some shifting uncomfortably, others wearing those same smug, confident smiles they always had. They thought they had it all figured out. They thought I was just another fool. I inhaled deeply, then turned my gaze to my father-in-law. You know, I said, my voice steady, calm, deliberate, there's something I've always admired about you. Your belief that love is meant to be spread, that it should be shared. I paused, watching his expression. He nodded slightly, as if in agreement, his face glowing with the self-righteousness of a man who believed he had truly enlightened the rest of us. I continued, and you, sir, are the living embodiment of that belief. I gestured toward the massive screen behind me. The lights dimmed, and the projector whirred to life. A series of documents filled the screen. DNA reports, names, connections, cold, hard science that stripped away every last lie. Silence. My father-in-law leaned forward, squinting at the results, his smile faltering. His name appeared at the top, followed by a list of genetic matches. Here, I pointed, stepping aside so everyone could see. These are the DNA results for you and your daughters. I let that hang in the air, let them process it before I drove the knife in. Or should I say, not your daughters. The air in the room grew thick. Murmurs spread like wildfire. My mother-in-law's face went ghostly white. My wife's sisters exchanged nervous glances, their perfect world crumbling before them. You see, I said, this man, the one we've all gathered here to celebrate, has spent his life believing in sharing love. And in return, his wife has been more than willing to share hers as well. I turned to my father-in-law. Tell me, sir, I asked, my voice dripping with mock curiosity, how does it feel knowing that, after 50 years of marriage, not a single one of your daughters is actually yours? The silence was deafening. Then, for the first time that night, my father-in-law's face twisted into something I had never seen before. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked at my mother-in-law, eyes wild, searching for an answer, for some kind of denial, but there was none. I turned back to the crowd. But it doesn't stop there, I said, because, as it turns out, my wife has followed in her mother's footsteps. She's embraced the same philosophy, sharing love, spreading it freely. Another click. Another set of DNA results filled the screen. My kids, or rather, the kids I thought were mine. I watched my wife now. The color drained from her face. Her lips parted in disbelief. Mark, she whispered, but I held up a hand. Save it, I said, my voice sharp. I pointed at the screen again. This here, ladies and gentlemen, is the proof that my children, whom I have loved, whom I have raised, whom I have sacrificed for, are not mine. A strangled noise came from my wife's throat, but I ignored it. And it doesn't end there, I continued. One by one, I had every child in this family tested. Every single one of your precious daughter's kids. I gestured toward my wife's sisters, their husbands sitting in stunned silence, faces pale, hands shaking. None of them belonged to their supposed fathers. The room was frozen. Some people looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Others sat with their mouths open, struggling to process what they were witnessing. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I spoke again. But you see, there's one difference between me and all of you. I straightened, adjusting my suit jacket. I am not a generous man. I do not believe in sharing my love. A sharp knock on the door. Perfect timing. A process server walked in, a thick envelope in hand. He strode directly to my wife and dropped it in her lap. "You've been served," he said plainly. She stared at the folder, fingers trembling as she picked it up. "Mark, please," she whispered again, her voice cracking. I didn't respond. I simply turned to another man in the room. A man, Luke, I had never wanted to acknowledge but had come to know through my investigations. He was one of my former friends, someone I had welcomed into my home, someone I had trusted, and, as the DNA results had confirmed, he was the father of my children. The process server turned to him next, handing him another folder. "This," I said, "is for you. It's time you started paying for the upbringing of your kids." My wife's scream cut through the heavy silence of the banquet hall. "You can't do this to your children." I didn't react right away. I let her words hang in the air. Let her believe for just a second longer that I might hesitate, that I might reconsider. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her out of the corner of my eye. Then, slowly, I shook my head. "I don't have any children. You have seen to that." She blinked, as if she hadn't heard me right. "What?" she whispered. I gestured toward the giant screen still displaying the damning evidence, the proof of her betrayal, the years of deception now laid bare for everyone to see. "They are not my children." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see some people shifting in their seats, whispering, exchanging glances. Others just sat frozen, their eyes darting between me and my wife, unsure of what to do or say. My mother-in-law had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. My father-in-law was still staring at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. "Mark, please," she started again, stepping toward me, reaching out like she could still fix this, like she could still wrap me back into her web of lies. I stepped back. "No," I said sharply, making her freeze mid-step. "You and your cheating sisters and mother are nothing to me." Her breath hitched. I could see it in her eyes. Realization, dawning horror. She knew. She finally knew that she had pushed me too far. That I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just hurt. I was done. "I don't even want the children you passed off as mine to thank me for all the years I devoted to them," I continued, my voice hard, final, because every moment, every sacrifice, every damn thing I did for them was built on a lie. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. I turned away. And then, without another word, I walked out. I didn't just win. I obliterated them. My state wasn't one of those ridiculous no-fault states where cheaters get off easy. No, here, adultery mattered. Fraud mattered. And thanks to my meticulous planning, every single one of them paid, literally. I sat in the courtroom, calm and collected, while my wife and her sisters squirmed in their seats. The judge listened to the audio recordings, read through the DNA reports, and reviewed every disgusting conversation they had right in my own home. He looked over at them, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "So," he said, turning his gaze toward my wife, his voice laced with contempt, "you and your sisters knowingly deceived your husbands, bore children fathered by other men, and not only conspired to keep it hidden but laughed about it?" My wife's lawyer tried to object, but the judge wasn't having it. "Sit down, counselor," he snapped before looking back at my wife. "I've seen a lot in my years on this bench, but this level of deception, this calculated cruelty, is rare." I sat back and watched the reality sink in. The court awarded me 90% of our assets. Everything we built together? Mine. The house? Mine. The cars? Mine. The vacation home her family loved? Mine. And that was just the start. Next came the fathers, the real ones. See, those idiots had no idea they had kids. And in my state, once paternity is established, so is financial responsibility. I dragged each and every one of them into court. They sat there, pale-faced, as DNA results confirmed what I already knew. "Congratulations," I told one of them as we stepped out of the courtroom. "You've got a son. Now pay up." The ones who could afford it? They settled quickly, desperate to avoid more embarrassment. The ones who tried to fight? They lost, spectacularly. But I wasn't done. The real goldmine was my wife's sisters. With those audio recordings, I proved in court that they weren't just cheaters. They were co-conspirators in paternity fraud. And that opened the door for punitive damages. One by one, the judgments rolled in. I drained them dry. By the time I was finished, I had raked in over $3 million from the fathers, the sisters, and of course, my ex-wife. But I didn't stop there. I prepared for this. Every step of it. I cashed in my life insurance. I borrowed every last cent I could against the house. I maxed out every single credit card we had. I liquidated my 401k, took my full vacation payout, and sold every single stock in my portfolio. I bled every possible dollar from the system. And by the time it was all said and done, I had another $1 million sitting in my fund. I walked away from it all. With my bank accounts flush and no ties left to bind me, I left the country. First stop, the Caribbean. I spent a month in paradise. Crystal clear waters, warm breezes, and not a single reminder of my old life. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of waves lapping against the shore. I drank my coffee on the balcony of a beachfront villa, watching the sunrise over the ocean. No more lies. No more betrayals. Just peace. At night, I'd sit in a beachside bar, sipping rum while live music played in the background. The locals were friendly, the tourists were fleeting, and no one knew my name. I liked it that way. But eventually, the island life started to feel temporary. I needed something more. So, I went to Paris. I picked up my old profession, architecture. It had been years since I worked in the field, but the skills were still there, waiting to be dusted off. Paris was a city of old-world charm and new beginnings, and I fitted right in. Now, my evenings are spent in the park, watching pigeons fight over bits of bread. There's something oddly satisfying about their little battles. Simple, honest, instinctual. Nothing like the deception I left behind. Life is peaceful. Life is good.